So Trump really wants to summit with Xi Jinping. He is desperate to get on a plane, go to China, sit down, man to man. He's very deferential to these powerful global leaders. China, no country is supposed to hit back at this. You're not supposed to take your revenge on the Trump administration. You're supposed to suck it up. China didn't. Went toe to toe, went out to. The worst of it was this supply chain war. And the U.S. completely underestimated China on this one.
大家好，我是老吴。上期节目分享的是狄东升教授在2025年7月在深圳的最新演讲，他深入地剖析了中东局势的变化以及背后牵扯到的大国博弈。狄教授的观察一向敏锐，观点原创且独到，我个人认为这次的内容非常精彩，很值得一看。不过这期视频的观看次数却很低，我猜测可能是因为演讲中提到的一些敏感词导致 YouTube 被动限流，所以如果你还没有看过，强烈推荐补上。另外也特别想提醒一下已经订阅了我频道的朋友，记得开启小铃铛通知功能。我看后台数据显示，开启提醒订阅者比例非常低，这样一来 YouTube 就不一定会把我新上传的视频第一时间推送给你。不想错过更新的话，请一定要打开小铃铛。那今天这期节目，我想和大家分享一段有意思的访谈，就在前2天，一位普利策奖得主名叫安德鲁·布朗的资深记者接受了新西兰媒体的采访，谈了谈他对中美竞争的看法。先简单介绍一下这位布朗先生，他是英国人，当过《华尔街日报》的中国编辑，他非常熟悉中国，对中国持批判态度。我们今天选取的是访谈中关于中美竞争的核心部分，访谈里还有一段没有选进来的内容，主要是指责中国的地缘野心，呼吁新西兰要和盟友联合起来对抗中国等等这些西方媒体经常谈到的内容。而我们挑选的这一部分，布朗讲得非常细致，主要聚焦在贸易战上。他的结论是特朗普政府被中国完胜。那么他在访谈中具体讲了哪些有意思的细节？接下来我们就进入访谈。
What have you made of the US-China relationship since President Trump took over the White House once again?
It's in a bad place, and it suffers from enormous contradictions. And the central contradiction is that at a high level, at a strategic level, there is an almost complete absence of trust. So each side thinks the very worst of the other side. China thinks that the United States is out to throttle its development, kill its economy. The US thinks that China is out to expel the United States from Asia. So they're competitors. They are rivals. In some ways, they are adversaries. We had a Pentagon official in Australia the other day saying to the effect that we'd be lucky to get through to the 2030s without conflict with China. So that's where we are. That's Elbridge Colby, who is in charge of policy at the Pentagon. So that's where we are at a strategic level. And yet, these two economies are joined at the hip. And that is what we have discovered from the two of them slugging it out in this trade war.
How so?
So it starts off as a tariff war. And by the way, I think that China has completely outplayed the Trump administration on trade in this episode. It starts off with tariffs, and Trump escalates. Starts off, I can't even remember, it was 50%, and then ratchets all the way up to 145%. China, no country is supposed to hit back at this. You're not supposed to take your revenge on the Trump administration. You're supposed to suck it up. China didn't. Went toe to toe, went up to 125%, which is more or less prohibitive, right? So now we have a mutual trade blockade, and the U.S. caved. They completely caved, right? So they went to Geneva, took off most of the tariffs, unwound, then we got back to roughly 30%, 20% fentanyl, 10% baseline, plus legacy, 20%. That's what. However, that wasn't the worst of it. The worst of it was this supply chain war. And the U.S. completely underestimated China on this one. So you had Scott Bessent, an incredibly sophisticated investor, ran his own hedge fund in New York. He's saying at the beginning of all this, we have all the cards, right? So if they export 5 times as much to us as we export to them, we've got the cards. He used this poker analogy. He said, they're sitting at the table and playing with a pair of twos, right? So
they might have all the cards, but they don't have all the rare earths.
Well, that's exactly right. So they flip the cards, and it turns out that China's got a couple of aces, right? So, and one of them, the most important one is rare earths. And so now they start, hurling thunderbolts at each other, right? This is a war of the worlds. This is supply chain. So, China says to the okay, we're gonna close down your defense sector, and they can do that, right? They control the permanent magnets, and the US says, okay, fine, we're going to stop the sale of jet engines to you. So we're going to close down your entire civilian airliner program. China says, fine, we'll close your auto industry down, right? And actually, Ford had to close down a factory in Michigan. There are scores of these batteries. So this is how that was far more consequential. Got to the point where both sides recoiled from this. It was going to do enormous damage, both to their own economies, of course, to the global economies, since the two of them combined are like 50% of global GDP. That is where we are now. We are at a truce. Trump thinks he has a deal. Doesn't have a deal at all. He has a truce.
How do you see it playing out from here?
Well, it's so Trump really wants to summit with Xi Jinping. He is desperate to get on a plane, go to China, sit down, man to man. He's very deferential to these powerful global leaders, Putin in Russia, Xi Jinping. His last time around, he called Xi Jinping admiringly the emperor of China, right? So he thinks, okay, the two of us are going to sit down, we're going to hash it all out. I don't think this is the way the Chinese are going to play this at all. I mean, they've seen the video, right? They've seen the ritual humiliation of Zelensky. You never said thank you once. Ramaphosa from South Africa was in there. He had to suck it up. Dim the lights. Let's play this ludicrous video from you. Xi Jinping is not going to take that. He will not be humiliated in any way. His Sherpa's going to be out there. They're going to have everything nailed down, buttoned down before the event. Very, very ceremonial. But I do think we're starting to see the beginnings of what might look like some kind of negotiated settlement. We saw part of that today with the decision to allow NVIDIA chips, H20 chips, into China. The Trump administration had actually banned those chips. So there could be something to play for in terms of lifting some of the sanctions on technology in exchange for rare earths. But then again, that's only getting back to the status quo, right?
If you put this in a kind of game theory context, you say that China has outplayed the US when it comes to the tariff dispute thus far, but is there an argument to be made that by playing the rare earths card and restricting the supply of rare earths, China has actually woken much of the so-called Western world up to the supply chain issue you identify? So the Europeans and the Americans, for example, are saying, right, we have to move with immediacy to ensure that actually we aren't reliant on the Chinese in the future for this rare earth supply?
You're absolutely right, and this is now a kind of a warp speed moment for the United States, and you're going to see a lot of money going into the production of rare earths magazines. You're already starting to see it. It takes time, right? So this is not an overnight solution by any means. The other problem that the US has is that you're much better off, if you want to go up against China, you're much better off doing it in a coalition with allies, right? So, and this is part of the underestimation that, and I don't think that Trump or Bessent went into these talks understanding it, or a figure like Peter Navarro, who's all for decoupling the economies, that China's industrial base is the United States, plus Germany, plus Japan, plus South Korea, and then some, right? So, it is literally the case that if part of the rationale for the tariffs is to reshore manufacturing to the United States, there is actually no reindustrialization of America without China. If Apple wanted to move its production of iPhones to the United States, if it was possible, which I don't think it is, if it was possible, they would have to take Chinese-made equipment, machinery, with them. So it's not just rare earths.
Yeah.
China is a global manufacturing Goliath. America may be the financial superpower. China is the manufacturing superpower, and that gives it an incredible base on which to build the technologies of the future, where China is now running away with it in many areas.
By some measures, the amount of money that China has invested in the Belt and Road Initiative since the start of the century is equivalent to, or even more, than the amount of money that the US spent on wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Are there things that Western observers perhaps still misunderstand about Xi Jinping's vision for China and its place in the world?
Yeah, they misunderstand this vision entirely. And look, nobody else is building bridges. I think China gets a bad rap when it comes to the Belt and Road. I mean, and this all starts with India, with his analyst, and he's talked about debt trap diplomacy and so on and so forth. The debt trap diplomacy is actually a bit of a myth. China is supplying public goods to the world now in clean tech. America has just, by the way, walked out of the energy transition. If you're in Africa, if you're in Latin America, if you're in the Middle East and you want clean tech, you're going to go to China, right? So this is the way that China, it used to be this. It's in the Cold War, we were talking about war of hearts and minds. China is winning substantially that war of hearts and minds against the United States in the developing world, and it's an important trend.
What makes China vulnerable? I think about the obvious economic slowdown. Youth unemployment is still putting forward some pretty eye-watering figures domestically within China at the moment. Are there things that you think make China's position in the world vulnerable going forward?
Look, at a macro level, China has problems. Okay, so you identified the key problems. The economy is slowing. A multi-year real estate meltdown. Prices continue to drop. High-quality real estate developers continue to face problems. High youth unemployment. This feeds into a real problem with consumer demand. Okay, so, and this affects New Zealand. So you're selling into the Chinese middle classes. Your core market in China is feeling a lot of economic pain. But China can take that pain. And this is another thing that the Trump administration didn't really understand, right? So China is prepared to sacrifice growth. It's prepared to write off whole provinces because its game now is focusing on technology. Xi Jinping believes that we're at an inflection point. He calls it an opportunity unseen in a century, and that opportunity is to take on and win the tech war against the United States. That is where he's applying his resources, whole of nation, public-private partnerships, universities, bottomless supplies of state funding, enormously wasteful. People focus on the waste, but also incredibly effective.
So, in trying to analyse the competition between the US and China in the tech space, I think maybe the mainstream wisdom has been that the US has dominated artificial intelligence, but that China's well ahead when it comes to clean technologies. Is that right?
Well, according to ASPE, China is ahead in 47, what's the number, 47 to 51 technologies that are going to make the 21st century. On AI, I was in China quite recently. In fact, I was there on April the 2nd, Liberation Day, and people pretty much shrugged it off. And one of the reasons is that they're getting their mojo back, and part of that is DeepSeek, right?
Yeah.
So this was a David and Goliath story, right? So all the big tech giants in Silicon Valley, they're spending $1 billion and more on large language models. This little sort of plucky startup from Hangzhou comes along, operating out of a small apartment. They come up with a model that's not bad. It was not quite as good as the
ChatGPTs of the world.
ChatGPT, but gets gets the job done. Everybody in America is first reaction is, oh my God, they must have stolen it from us, as per usual. But no, China has armies of engineers, and they're producing breakthroughs. And now you've got all these intelligent agents, these apps, and Manus is one of them. Everybody is on their phone playing with this. The Chinese are great at adopting, industry is great at adopting technology, and they're now integrating this immediately into production. And this has given them Philippines, given the markets in Hong Kong, by the way. People in China are now starting to reinvest in the Hong Kong market because they're investing in their own tech companies that are listed there.
Personally speaking, how do you feel about the freedom that you might or might not have to criticize China? Do you ever feel like you have to self-censor?
Not really. I lived in China for many years. I wrote a column for the Wall Street Journal. I was pretty critical. I was critical of a lot of the things that Xi Jinping was doing. But since I've left, that was in 2018. Things have tightened up. There are very few journalists left in China. They're monitored, they're surveyed. Very difficult to get information. It's like the old days, It's sort of back in the 80s, early 90s. You try to get an interview with a source, and the source gets a call from the public security, or gets a call from the public security before you've even got the interview, and they back off. So yeah, it's closing. People say that the United States is looking inward. China's looking inward too.
Finally, and I realise this might be a difficult ask, but can you shake the magic 8-ball for us? At the end of the century, when you think about the contest between the US and China, how do you see it sitting?
So I think on the tech side, it's all to play for. The US has deep capital markets, unmatched venture capital industry. That funds a great deal of innovation. It gives the United States global power and respect. China is the manufacturing superpower. As I said earlier, I think that from that base, China now starts to develop technologies. And we've seen in sector after sector, China is either catching up with the United States or has drawn level with the United States, and in many cases is pulling away. I wouldn't count the United States out. I wouldn't count the innovation, the ingenuity of American tech companies, but neither would I dismiss the challenge from China. They are very, very focused, and they have a system which works extremely well for them. Everybody got that wrong. They all thought that the socialist market economy would collapse under its own contradictions, waste, and so on. A lot of contradictions, and heaven knows there's a lot of waste in the Chinese system, but they also have awesome capabilities.
好，安德鲁·布朗的这段访谈就到这里。我个人认为，布朗对中美实力的分析还是比较客观的。他主要提到了这样几个核心观点：第一，这一轮的关税战，中国完胜，而且中国掌握了以稀土为代表的供应链控制权。他用"彻底屈服"这个词来形容美国在关键领域陷入被动的处境。第二，他提出了一个观点，那就是没有中国就没有美国的再工业化。他认为今天美国的制造业回流根本离不开中国生产的机器设备。这个现实戳破了很多西方政治家不切实际的脱钩幻想。第三，展望未来，他把中美竞争的核心聚焦在了科技领域。虽然他强调了美国在资本和创新上的优势，但他也不得不承认，中国的体制在推动技术发展上展现出了令人敬畏的能力，并且在很多关键技术上已经处于领先地位。总的来说，从这样一位资深的西方记者眼中，我们可以清楚地看到，西方世界对中国的认知正在发生变化，那种曾经的优越感正在被一种更复杂的心态取代，既警惕中国，又不得不面对现实。好，今天的分享就到这里，感谢大家的收看，咱们下次再见。